Great to see you here again. My name is Luc de Ceuster, founder of the Ceuster Academy, and this is a new video about resources, budgets, and Project Libre. But in this presentation, I will look deeper into the principles of smoothing and how to find the planned start and finish time of activities. We are looking at resolving resources issues. But before we continue, don't forget to click on the subscribe button, click on the bell button, and every time we have a new video, YouTube will inform you about it. Let's have a look at smoothing, resources smoothing. What is this about? We are looking at the resources where they have over allocation. And remember, we can only use the resources as they have been assigned to the project. And that's 100% of their availability. Now, when we look at smoothing, we're going to try to resolve issues when the utilization due to combination of different activities is over those 100%, and we are going to use the slack or the float to do this. Now, when we apply smoothing, we are not going to change the duration of the critical path activities. We may create additional paths, additional critical paths, but the total project duration will not change. When smoothing, non-critical paths or the activities on those non-critical paths, they may start later and their duration may be changed as long as the activities can be completed not later than their late finish time. When changing the finish time of the activities, this will also affect the successors, and we will look at that in an exercise. We look at some simple exercise related to smoothing. Here you see the different activities. We see the durations, the predecessors, the cost per period. I put it the same for all the periods. I will use that later when we are looking at the budget. And our dear friend Harry Potter is here again. He's working on the activities A, B, C, and D. F, G, and H is not working on activity E. Now you can stop the video here and create the precedence diagram. So basically you will see what that precedence diagram will look like. So you are back. I hope you finished the precedence diagram. It's a good exercise because a lot of exercises we do in project management involve a precedence diagram. And here is the precedence diagram. So we see the different paths and you already can identify the critical path here, which is B, E, G, and H. And the total duration of the project is 20 periods. In this case, the slack is 0 for the critical path activities. And we see that the other activities have also slack. For example, C has 13 periods, D 6 periods, F 9 periods, and so on. Now let's have a look at our application in Excel and see what is the original situation. And this is the original situation when we had all those data, all the early start and the early finish times for the different activities, and see what in fact the utilization of Harry Potter is. And what we see here in this graph, we have the green and then the colored, let's say striped activities or periods. Those are the slack. And we have activity A going from period 1 till 2. And the late finish is in period 8. And we see that for all the different activities, the reddish colored activities are the activities on the critical path, and it's very important to identify them. Now what we see here, we have in the period 1 up to 5, we have a problem, and you see the numbers in red, except for period 6. Yes, it was probably colored because you can set the coloring automatic once the total utilization of Harry Potter is over 100% or over 1. So don't look at the 0.9. We don't have a problem there. Anyway, it's 90% is below the 100%. What can we do there? Here we see that we have that over allocation And we can immediately look at the activity A, where we have 6 periods of slack that we can use. And we can use their different combinations, moving A, extending the duration, and so on. But be careful when we move A, we also have to take into account C and D. We always have to look at the successors, also B as successor F, but that's the only problem here. Now, in some projects, it can become very complicated, and that's why we have that software. Now, we try to find a solution here, and we're going to do that in Excel, and let's have a look at the solution in Excel. When we look at the exercise that we completed and we look at the early start position, we see that we have a problem in the periods 1 till 5. 6 is unfortunately in red, but it's not a problem here because we're smaller than 1. And we can now see what we can do when we will be applying smoothing. So let's have a look to smoothing step 1. Now, when we look at the values here, the first thing we can do is the simplest thing is to increase the duration of activity A from 1 to 4 periods. And now we immediately see that we resolve the problem for the first 4 periods. We also see that C and D are moved to a new start time. We didn't change the duration, but basically we have a new start time. And we see that we still have a problem in periods 5 and 6. Now, what can we do here? Well, now we have to look at some other actions that we can take. The first thing we can do is to increase the duration of C. And we see that we still have a problem here in period 5. It didn't help. So what we're going to do is to have D start later in period 6. The duration doesn't change. So what we have is that D will now be starting in period 6 and finish at period 9. So basically what we see here is that we have a solution. So let's go back to the presentation and see what we can do with this. So this is the result after the first step. We see that we changed something here. When we look back at the first 5 periods, what did I do? I extend A from 2 to 4 periods. We still start in period 1. There is no problem there. Now we see that we resolved all the problems. We see that our activity takes 4 periods. And we also see that C and D had to be moved. Now, what we also did is that we increased the duration of C to 3 periods. So we have, let's say, a lower utilization. D is still lower, but when we looked at D in period 5, where we could basically start with activity D, we would have an over allocation. So we moved this away from from period 5, we moved it into the slack, and we are starting here at period 6. We don't do anything with F because we don't have to, and we see that we have a solution here, and basically we solve the problem. We solve the problem. C and D, the successors of A, moved into the slack. We even moved D to period 6, and now we also see that the activities A, C, and F, D also still have a lot of slack available, D a little bit less, but certainly for activity A and activity F and activity C, there is a lot of slack, and we know that during that period we lose our flexibility when we have changes that involve those activities, and it may be better to do something about the slack and move those activities further away. Nevertheless, we solved the problem. The first problem we've solved. We don't have a problem with our friend Harry Potter, but let's have a look in Excel if we can find a better way to use the slack and to move the activities so that the slack, the total slack of the project is reduced and acceptable. When we finished this first step, the smoothing the simple solution, we saw that we still have a lot of slack. And slack means that we still have a lot of flexibility, but we can optimize our plan by moving the activities further into the slack and reducing the slack. Slack is good, but too much slack is not really good because we are losing flexibility. Just imagine we have activity activity F. We start with activity F in period 6, we finish the activity, and then we still have 9 periods of slack. Imagine what happens if we prepare something that we have to store for those 9 periods, or when we may encounter a problem and we want to change some things in the project and these relate to activity F, it means that we have to redo that activity, we lost the money. Also, cash flow wise, it's better to put the activities later because then we have a better financial performance of our project. Now, what are we going to do? Let's have a look how we can improve this now when we are going to look at the alternative solution, when we are going to look at the slack. One of the things we can do is for activity A, we can move it 1 period in the slack, so we have 2, start at 2. We keep the duration of 4, so we start at 2 and finish at 5, which means that we have less slack here. We could also go a little bit further, but let's say 3 periods of slack is perfect for this activity, so I don't do anything there anymore. B we don't touch, because if we would touch B, it would change the duration of the project. When we look at C and D, D basically is okay. We don't have a big problem with D because we have still 2 periods of slack, which is quite okay. I don't want to change that. And now we are looking at activity F, C and F. Now, when we look at C, what I do is, in fact, I will move it to activity or to period 13. And we have now a problem here because I have the 7 here. This is not really good. I have to adjust it because the early finish has to be larger than the early start. And we say we finish at 15, so we have 3 periods. We move it to the end, so we have 2 periods of slack that we still have. Now the same we do for activity F, and for activity F we go to period 11. And now we have the early finish, which we select, which would be 12. And we also have less slack here. There is still some slack left. In this case, we could still go a little bit further, but here we have the 0.7, so we have to be careful here. I could move further, but I'm not going to do it. This is in fact the new solution that I have. I see down here all the values are below 1, so basically this is a good solution. This is another proposal, another result that we obtained from our Excel exercise. What we see here is that we changed the start and the finish times of activity A. We moved it a little bit farther, so we have a little bit less slack. We moved activity C to period 13 till 15. Activity D is still there. We only had 2 periods of slack. And we also moved F to a later time from 11 to 12. Now basically it resolves a part of the slack. There is less slack. Some people may say we move all of them to the end, but I think that's in fact not always the good solution because we don't have any more flexibility. And it will mean also during the execution that we cannot do anything with those activities anymore. When we have problems on some critical path activities, we can move resources from those activities with a lot of slack to activities that are in distress. So that's what we did here, but we can also find another proposal, another possibility. So let's have a look again at Excel, how we find this new proposal. Let's have a look now at another acceptable solution. We're going to look at some other elements. And one of the other elements that could be quite interesting is to find out how can we optimize, in fact, the work Harry Potter is doing. And we see that we have a lot of different levels of engagements, and we want to change this. Now, what we're going to do here is, in fact, we are going to move the activity here to period 8, and we start at 6. So we go to three periods instead of 4 periods. We leave B the same. For activity C, what can we do? Well, we can move it to 9, to period 9, and we finish in 12. So again, you see that we find 0.7, 0.7, here 0.5, and the most of it is 0.7. So this already looks a little bit better. It could already be a solution. We are going to use the slack here of D. We're going to use the slack of D to move it further. So I'm going from period 9 till period 12. Basically, that is necessary because C and D have A as predecessor, so D could not start before. So we had to move D to the first period after the period 8, where A finishes. We still have here the 0.6 that we have, and what we're going to do, we're going to move this again to 6 till 8, and we find now the totality of those activities. This is the final solution, and we find here that Harry Potter now is allocated for 70%, except in those 4 periods. So this is another acceptable solution. There are different solutions that are possible. The rule is to avoid the fact that we have to extend the project. We try to reduce the slack. We try to find an even utilization of the resource. These are all elements that we have to take into account. And there are different possibilities. Now, this is only a planning. It means that once you start working on the project, things can change and we will have to adjust the plan as we go. So basically, that's it. Let's go back to the presentation. This is the second proposal. I looked at it a little bit differently here. I looked at optimizing the utilization of Harry Potter. Now, in the previous solutions, we saw that there is not an even utilization of Harry Potter, which is not considered to be optimal. It may be better to have a more even utilization. And what we see here, when we look at the bottom here, we see that allocation is around 70%. We have a little bit lower in periods 9 to 12, but basically, for most of the time, we are utilizing, Harry Potter is working at a constant pace with some reserve on all the activities that we have. Most of the time 70%, except those 4 periods. What else can we consider? We look at activity A and activity D. Here we move the activities to the end of their let's say to the latest finish time. We see that activity A has no slack anymore, the same for activity D. This means that those activities are now on the critical path. So we have basically a second critical path that is here now, and it means that as a project manager, you have to be very careful to see what's happening on that critical path, the original critical path and the second critical path that we have. It's not ideal, but we have to find a solution. How will it go? Can we do this? It's about the experience, and it's also later about managing the project. Don't ever forget, we're just making a plan, and we know that a plan is changed the moment you start working on it. The circumstances are changed. So when you make a plan that's too perfect, well, you are not really happy when you have to change it. And a perfect plan is not always the necessity. We can do that here in class to see what are the possibilities. But in reality, a perfect plan may be a reason why we have problems, because people don't want to change the originally planned project. Another element that we can have a look at here, we still have those two activities, C and F, which still have a very large amount of slack left. So we may try to find other possibilities. We try to find other solutions to the smoothing problem. Software can help you with that. I think Microsoft Project has this integrated in the system, and you can find an optimized way how to deal with the smoothing in a project. So that was in fact all I wanted to tell you about resources smoothing, trying to find solutions to resources overutilization by changing the start and the finish time of the activities, changing the duration, but using the available flexibility, using the slack. We are not going to extend the duration of the project. So that was it for this video. But don't forget, click on the subscribe button, click on the bell button, and every time YouTube has a new video, YouTube will send you, every time we have a new video, YouTube will send you a message to warn you about it. Anyway, thank you very much, and I'm looking forward to seeing you in our next video. Bye bye.